So can everyone, oh, there it is. Love how they added that. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Thumbs up. Okay, cool, cool. Sometimes you have to click it and then there we go. All right, I'm gonna hide our faces because that distracts me. So building futures, we've been around since 1988. Our mission statement is to build communities with underserved individuals and families where they're safely and supportively housed, free from homelessness and family violence. So we're a dual agency in that we work with homeless individuals and families as well as survivors of domestic violence. So we have the following services. We do have housing services. So that's things like vouchers or project-based places, and we get all of those referrals through 211. So unfortunately, people can't just call our office and get referred that way. They have to go through 211 through the CES process. But we do have people that handle housing things. We have 2 shelters that are emergency shelters for women and children. We have 1 domestic violence safe house. That's for people that are fleeing from a violent relationship. Although the location of our shelters is not really advertised, the domestic violence safe house is the one that has that really tight confidentiality that we take very seriously. And then we have BCC, which stands for Bessie Coleman Court. So this is 52 units of supportive housing that we kind of case manage and provide some on-site support. However, we don't fill the spots that are vacant. So that's done through Alameda County Homestretch, APC, Alameda Point Collaborative is what that stands for, or 211. So that's how you get in. Again, we just kind of provide like the on-site support and everything, because the qualifications for BCC include you have to be a survivor of domestic violence, chronic homelessness, and then I believe a disability, and there might be others, but those are the 3 that I know. And then as far as domestic violence services go, so we have domestic violence counseling. I do court accompaniment. So if someone needs to go to court for a CPS case or for custody or for a restraining order, I can go with them just to be like that moral support for them. I do support groups. I do a community support group once a week, every Wednesday from 6 to 7. We're doing that through Zoom right now, just obvious reasons, COVID and everything. So if you know anyone and want to refer people, feel free to give them my information, which I will put in the chat at some point, I promise. I also do support groups at all of our other sites. So I do support groups at all 4 of the other sites. And then I do outreach, which is things like this, doing presentations. I think I've been on a couple panels, and just really getting the word out there about building futures as well as domestic violence and providing that education. And then we do have a 40-hour domestic violence counselor training that we put on at least once a year, usually twice a year. It's actually going on right now. And then here on the left is some of our cool graphics and stuff. There's me from many years ago. So I'll also put our link, our website's super easy, BFWC, Building Futures with Women and Children.org. We revamped our website a few years ago, and it's really easy to navigate and really colorful if you're looking for anything. So today, hopefully, learning objectives, you'll be able to define what domestic violence is, understand the cycle of violence, understand some of the barriers to leaving, as well as why people stay, and then name the different forms of abuse. Okay, so in terms of definition, domestic violence is a pattern of behavior that's used to establish power and exert control by one intimate partner against another. So there tends to be an aggressor and a victim. According to California Penal Code, there's 2 sections, right? Because it defines abuse first, and then under that definition is domestic violence. So abuse is intentionally or recklessly causing or attempting to cause bodily injury, and domestic violence is defined as abuse committed against an adult or a minor who is a spouse, former spouse, cohabitant, former cohabitant, a person with whom the suspect has had a child, or is having or has had a dating or engagement relationship. Basically, any intimate partner. You don't have to be married. You could just be living together. You can only have a child together and nothing else. But those are the types of relationships that we consider to be domestic violence. So an extremely common problem. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men will experience contact, sexual violence, and physical violence or stalking by an intimate partner. And they reported an intimate partner violence related impact during their lifetime. I will say too that I say domestic violence or DV. Another common term that's a lot of people are using nowadays is IPV, intimate partner violence. In terms of whether or not you use one over the other is generally considered just a preference. So I kind of mix them, try to mix it together a little bit, but that's sort of how you'll hear it be referred to. I might also use gendered language. I might refer to the male as the abuser and the female as the survivor. And please know that I'm not doing this just because I think all abuse happens to, women by men, and that's not at all true. Actually, within a same-sex relationship, abuse that occurs at about the same rate. So that's just from my experience, but I also, I will also try and flip it around and give you some examples. I love giving examples and things of when a female might abuse a man. So approximately 1 in 5 female victims and 1 in 20 male victims need medical care as a result of intimate partner violence. Female victims sustain injuries 3 times more often than male victims. Probably, for obvious reasons, right? If it's statistically speaking, if the majority of domestic violence happens when a man is abusing a woman, generally speaking, men are stronger than women. Of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, right? Or there's always exceptions. But 1 in 5 female victims and 1 in 9 male victims need legal services. So that could be a restraining order, could be custody, could just be getting a divorce. 23.2% of women and 13.9% of men have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner during their lifetime. And you can get these statistics and some other handouts from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. It's their website's NCADV, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence.org, and they have a lot of great handouts. So I've sort of defined what domestic violence is, as according to the penal code. And now I sort of want to go through and debunk some of these really common myths, because I think that right out there in the world, there's a lot of ideas about who domestic violence affects and how it affects people, and, that people can just leave. And so I just like to start out by debunking some of the common myths. So the first one, only low-income families and minorities experience domestic abuse. Not at all true. It can and does happen to people at every level. People who have a lot of money, people who don't have a lot of money. It cuts across all races, all economic classes, all ethnic, cultural, and religious groups. Domestic violence happens to everybody. The next myth, domestic violence is caused by alcohol and drug use. This is something that we hear a lot, right? That, the alcohol or drug use is when things get physical, maybe, or, the only time they might see the violence. And although there's like a correlation there, right? Because if someone's is intoxicated, they probably don't have as much of a awareness of their use and level of force as when they're sober. So they're often associated with domestic violence, alcohol and drugs, but they don't cause it. So even if an abuser gets sober or gets clean and stops drinking or stops using drugs, they will probably still have some of the other behaviors that we see within a domestic violence relationship, such as control and manipulation and verbal abuse, emotional abuse, things like that, which we'll get to as well. One big myth, that abusers are violent because they cannot control their anger and frustration. So they use it as an excuse to rationalize or blame their abusive behavior. Anger is not the cause of abuse, it's a conscious choice. So abuse is a conscious choice that's made by the abuser. And if you look at this, as, sort of, you can see the proof, right, is that they often choose to abuse their partners only in private, where they take steps to ensure that there's no visible evidence, such as hitting them in the head or hitting them, on the body where the clothes cover it. So abusers often act like they cannot control themselves. In fact, the opposite is true. They actually are in complete control of themselves. And each time they choose to abuse, whether that's physical or verbal or emotional, they're making that choice to do so. I think the most clear indicator that they are in control is the scenario where, this happens all the time, where 911 gets called, whether that's by someone in the house or a neighbor or whatever. They come and they, will separate the two parties, and they're supposed to, talk to them separately out of, eye and earshot of each other. And the abuser might have been acting crazy, like right before the cops got there. They're punching holes in the wall. They have threatened them with a weapon, whatever it might be. But when the police get there, they are calm and cool as a cucumber, you know, like, I don't know, I'm fine. Like, she's hysterical, like she hit me, like, I don't know, like it just came on all of a sudden. So I think, you know, that being able to turn it on and off like a light switch is a really big indicator of the fact that they are making a choice. But those two things are hard to reconcile, right? Because abuse doesn't feel like a choice all the time. It often feels like they're not in control and they can't control themselves. And so I still, even in all the years that I've been doing this work for over 7 years, I still have a hard time reconciling those two things. And I think for me personally, I always just come back to the 911 sort of scenario, which really sort of like makes me remember, but I understand that it's really hard for those two realities to meet. The fact that they're making a choice, and that they are in control when they act like they're not. So the next myth, that domestic violence affects only a small percentage of the population. As we saw earlier, right, in the stats, nearly 1 in 3 American women report being physically or sexually abused by a partner at some point in their lives. So in this country, on average, more than 3 women a day are murdered by a current or former intimate partner. So that's every single day. And so, recent examples, right? The Gabby Petito case. There's this other case of this TikToker that I just heard about. I think it was yesterday, killing his girlfriend and the friend that she had over at her house, shooting them. This is stuff that's happening every single day. And that's why I think it's so important that we get the education out there, because people need to know that this is going on. Another myth, abusers are violent in all of their relationships. Oftentimes this is not true. So they'll cultivate this image of an upstanding citizen. They volunteer, they go to church, they do whatever, and they're only abusive to and violent, with their words or physically, to their targeted intimate partner. And that really indicates, right, that they're making that choice. And a lot of times they're building up this good reputation, or this sort of, everyone else sees them as this cool, laid back person and no big deal if you're late, or, and then when you are, it's like, whoa, and the reason that they do that is it makes it harder when the survivor reaches out, maybe to friends or family, to say like, this is what's really going on. They might be like, they wouldn't do that. What really happened? Because there's no way that they would react to that just because you did that. There's no way, and so they don't believe, because they don't see the bad stuff. And so that's why it's also really important to believe survivors, because we know that, this stuff happens and they can appear to the outside world as charming and, have a good job, doctors abuse, priests abuse, or no, priests can get, but pastors abuse, everyone does. So the next myth, so even if the abuser is violent or abusive, it's better for a child to have both parents, and that children aren't negatively affected unless they witness it or they're involved. So unfortunately, the reality is that being in a home where domestic violence is present is very damaging to children, whether they witness the abuse or not. So children raised in abusive homes are more likely than their peers to be in an abusive intimate partner relationship in the future, either as victims or perpetrators. And so even if they're not seeing things, they might hear things. Even if neither of those things are true, they might see a bruise on mommy's face the next day. So kids are aware of what's going on. Even infants in the womb are affected by domestic violence. And I also like to tail end that with, if you get your kids into therapy, and they go to therapy and then maybe they revisit when they're older, they can recover and heal from these effects. They can. It's just that they oftentimes need that extra support. So that's, another great thing about Alameda County is we're very resource rich. And so there are all sorts of places where young children can get therapy. And some of the people that I've known that have had their kids get therapy after witnessing, they're like the most emotionally intelligent kids. It's kind of crazy, impressive. So I'll pause for a moment. Any questions so far? Or anything surprising?
I don't know if anybody saw the footage with the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, the police footage. I totally relate to what you said because he is so calm. He seems like the nicest guy. He's like so unassuming, so non-threatening, so friendly, so smiling. And unfortunately, that's not obviously who he really is. But when you were talking about how they act around other people to make the victim look unbelievable,
Yeah.
that totally came to mind.
Yeah, and even his mannerisms, and just, you don't, not every abuser is this big hulking, like person, sometimes they're even smaller than, the woman that they're abusing. And so it kind of made me think of that too, and that he's, was a pretty small guy overall. And, perhaps he played into that in terms of wanting other people to not see him as threatening.
I was wondering, will there be a PDF of this? Because sometimes I tend to forget about, all the stuff that I've learned.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'll export this as a PDF, and then I can send that to Kirsten, and she can send it out to, right, I'm assuming, to everyone that registered.
Okay.
So yeah, everyone can just, don't worry about taking notes. Sometimes it's nicer to just listen. Okay, so
Jessica, I'm sorry, I have a question.
okay.
Is it okay? Two questions. Same-sex relationships abuse happens at the same rate. So women are likely to abuse women just as often as men abuse women?
Statistically speaking, yeah. So yeah, yeah, I was gonna say another thought on that, but yeah, so occurs at about the same rate. So yeah, if a female is dating a female, if a male is dating a male, the combination of those, all of those, is about the same rate as it is for heterosexual couples.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and we'll see, right, that gender is fluid and gender is changing a lot, and people's sexuality is changing a lot, in the last few years. And I'm wondering what kind of statistics are going to come out on that at some point.
Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, I had just one more other question too. What the role of a mental health? Do abusers have any distinguishable like mental health characteristics, like narcissistic personality disorder or something like that? Or are they more prone to it? Or yeah.
Well, I definitely hear it thrown around a lot, but I'm not a therapist, so I generally avoid the diagnostic type language like narcissist or anything like that.
Got it.
However, I will say that I hear from people, right, that there are a lot of similarities between the two.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? Okay, and feel free to, keep them coming. So let's do the cycle of violence. So one thing that is often missing from the cycle of violence, but I made this one and it's super cute and I put it at the top, is that the beginning is usually good. So usually in the beginning of these types of relationships, it's the person is like what the other person wants them to be, in terms of how they're treated, it's acceptable. They're having a lot of fun. They're getting to know the person and everything seems, just really good. It's from there that the tension starts to build. And tension is like over time, it gets harder and harder to predict how the abuser is going to react to any given situation. So say in the past, I always tend to use the same examples, but I don't know. So like say, for example, it's, I'm trading off cooking or getting takeout with my partner. And maybe, in the beginning of the relationship, I had a long day or something. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to stop off and get like Chinese or something like that. And I kind of, oh, I'm sorry. I know that I'm supposed to cook, but I'm just really tired. And they might react in the beginning like, oh my gosh, don't even worry about it. You don't even have to explain. This is your night. Totally fine. So that's how it is in the beginning. And over time, that tension building, the same scenario might happen, but all of a sudden it's unacceptable. And how dare I, and I must not care about their health, that I'm buying them all this crap. And, they make the effort to cook and why can't I? And that, so it's, and then a lot of the like aggressive language too, like, crap and all this stuff and, all of that. So over time, one situation that might happen in the beginning that you feel like, okay, I know how they react to this. it becomes really unpredictable. And hence the feeling like you're walking on eggshells. You just feel like you're kind of tiptoeing around all the time. And I've heard other advocates talk about how, I like the way they phrased it, where it's like you don't get to be your authentic self. You're editing yourself before you speak, and so there's less authenticity, like within, you're not, or I guess spontaneous, you can't just be you. Everything has to be really thought through, because it's getting really hard to predict how your partner is going to react. And most of all, survivors they don't want the bad stuff to happen, right? Of course, who wouldn't, who would? But as this tension rises and rises, eventually there'll be an explosion. And this is where abuse occurs. Doesn't have to be physical. So it can be a particularly bad verbal argument, or maybe some words that haven't been used before are being used. You be this and da 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 da. Like, so it doesn't have to be physical. It can just be verbal. But I look at it like a line is crossed that hasn't been crossed before. And after this happens, generally speaking, and sometimes this phase will disappear the longer you're in the relationship. I've seen people who've been with people for 10 plus years and they don't even have a honeymoon phase anymore. But generally speaking, abuse happens, then you go into the honeymoon phase. This is the I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. I was drunk, I'll stop drinking, and maybe they do stop drinking for a little while. It's all of the apologies, and sometimes it's really convincing too. Sometimes they are crying, falling out on the floor, like pouring their heart out to you, being really vulnerable, we think, right? And so there's this, they're trying to draw you back into the relationship, because unfortunately the honeymoon phase never lasts. Eventually the tension begins again. So the honeymoon phase is meant to draw you back in. So for example, if it's, oh, I'll get counseling, and they start to go to counseling. So you're kind of like, okay, like this is good, things are getting better. But then, within 6 months or whatever, they're not going to counseling anymore and they don't need it. And then the tension will build. So they do sometimes, like, quote unquote, like follow through, but it's always temporary in order to get the survivor back into the relationship. And then the tension will build again, and then around we go. And this cycle takes a different amount of time to complete for different people. So one couple, this could take 10 years. Another couple, this could take a year. Another couple, this could take 6 months. So the time that it takes to complete the circle one time, like all the way around, varies from couple to couple. But the thing that is the same is that over time, once you do complete this cycle once, the frequency and intensity of these violent acts, whether they're verbal or physical, will get more intense and closer together. So that's why a lot of times advocates sometimes recommend keeping a calendar, although safety reasons around that, right? So I'll go in super brief to safety planning, but, because, if you're able to mark down or keep track of what's happening, you can see that, oh, this happened twice last year. Okay, it's happened like 5 times this year. Like, what's going on? Because a lot of times these types of relationships are, you're just trying to get to the next day. And you're not exactly counting, all of the things or keeping track. So hand in hand, I like to think the cycle of violence and the power and control wheel, because the power and control wheel is a really great way to sort of describe what abusers do and what survivors are experiencing when they're in these relationships. So they're experiencing coercion and threats. So, you better sleep with one eye open. It could be intimidation. So you better tell me where you've been. You better let me look at your phone. It could be breaking, smashing things. It could be towering over somebody. Abusers will also abuse pets and hurt pets. And so maybe they've hurt the pet to intimidate you, to get you to comply. And then we have emotional abuse. So this is all of the gaslighting, the name calling, making someone feel bad about themselves, breaking them down, and all of that. And I put this little, like someone's entering this door and it says like, do not disturb. Because I kind of think about the boundaries, right? Too, that like, you could be trying to set boundaries with this person, but they're never going to respect them. So I could say, hey, I'm going to go and do this work thing for an hour. But 5 minutes later, they're at the door bugging me with something that I have to answer right now. So no boundaries are respected. And then there's isolation, another huge part, because if someone feels like they're all alone, it's harder to reach out for help. So the abuser will begin to isolate the person from their family and friends and other people who might support them. And this is not always super overt. It can be, abusers certainly, I'm sure, have, I'm trying to think of examples where they've said, I don't want you talking to them, or so they could sort of say, I don't want you talking to those people, or they could sort of like come at it from another angle, like, oh, I just feel like every time you come home from hanging out with them, we just get into a really big argument. And don't you just think it would be better for our relationship if maybe you didn't, do this every week? So, it's not always like, like grr, like sometimes it's subtle, and can be under the guise of them acting like they're helping you, or doing you a favor. When in reality, the end effect is the same, which would be isolation. So another thing, minimize, deny, blame. 3 things that abusers do a lot. So they will minimize what happened. So they might say, oh, I didn't even give you a bruise. It's not like I hit you, compared to what some other people do, like you're lucky. So they'll minimize what happened. They'll deny it happened altogether. So they'll deny, I didn't hit you, you slipped and you fell. Don't you remember, you were drinking, you were really drunk, and all of that kind of stuff. And then they'll blame that it's the survivor's fault. And that's the reason that the abuse is occurring. There's always this shifting of responsibility. An abuser doesn't take responsibility for their abusive actions. They shift the blame, usually over to the survivor or some other excuse. There's always an excuse. They're always ready with an excuse. So using children. So, it could be custody, using custody to sort of like relay messages. Usually it's the abuser who is grilling the kids about information about mom or dad, or whatever, like, what are they doing? Who are they talking to? Are they talking to any men? All of that kind of stuff. And so they'll grill the kids about that. Sometimes they'll talk bad about the other parent, like I put here in this little, I'd love to keep playing with you, but your mom won't let us. And so saying things like that, well, mom's not letting us do this, or dad's not letting us do this. And then also we see very often that abusers will drag their survivor to court over and over again in regards to custody and visitation, and acting like, oh, that's my kid and I want to see my kid. That's my child. And they'll drag them to court a bunch of times and say they do get more visitation, or they get an extra weekend, or however, they don't show up. So that again, right, is they're doing it because they like that when they say, you have to be here at this day, at this time, that you have to obey because it's, the court calling you. So they're just using that as a tactic. And so legal abuse is definitely a thing. And you can imagine if someone has a lot of money, a ton of legal abuse. I have heard of cases that have cost $1 million, because of the amount of, they'll file erroneous paperwork, like it makes no sense. They'll just, money makes abusers, abuse in different ways, things like that, where they might, be able to afford a really fancy lawyer and, maybe the survivor can't. Financial abuse. So financial abuse can be gambling away money that's needed for the care of the family, or sort of just buying whatever they want and making the survivor pay for all of the, the kids stuff, the rent and all that. It could be forcing the survivor to give them money. It could be identity theft. So opening up a bunch of credit cards or lines of credit in the survivor with the survivor's social security number. And then another like more subtle way could be, hey babe, why don't you, it's such a hassle to have to take all the rent money out of your paycheck and put it in the joint account, because what's left over is smaller anyways. Wouldn't it be better for you to put your paycheck in direct deposit into our joint account and then take out the rest? And so, okay, that seems like, oh, okay, they're just trying to save me time or whatever. Maybe they're right. I only have 400 left afterwards, so I'll just kind of take that out and move it. But the end result now, right, is that your paycheck is being deposited into this joint account, which the other person has access to whenever they want. So they can take your money, use your money, I've heard of, people who, don't let their person have a debit card, don't let them, they'll change the PIN on them so they can't use it, ask for permission to go to the grocery store, and you'll have to, they give them a certain amount of money and you gotta, down the list, justify every purchase and give exact change. And so I think there's new studies and there's been a lot of attention being paid to financial abuse right now, because they've found that most abusive situations include some form of financial abuse. And then privilege. In the power and control wheel that I will send out that actually has all the words on it, this is one I just made for presentations. It says male privilege in this little square, but I don't like to say that because it's not really about that. I think it's that the abuser is the one who defines who does what within the household, who is responsible for what. There is no compromise. There is no middle ground. It is this. And so that could be, if a woman's abusing a man, like, you're the man, like, you need to, fix the car or whatever. And you can't take it in, like, we're not going to pay that, or, whatever. It's stereotypical male things, right? Whereas in a relationship that was equal or healthy, you have the discussion, right? And then it's like, okay, well, we don't want to have to pay for it, but also you can't just learn, okay, like maybe we can ask a friend to help you, or, you come up with solutions. In an abusive situation, there is none of that. It's just, you do this is your responsibility, this is your duty. And they might even say, oh, I do the garden, or whatever. And then guess what? They never do it. Like, they don't, not always, but sometimes they'll give themselves tasks that they don't even really do or accomplish. And they'll expect you to do them all. So types of abuse, all different kinds, right? So physical abuse, that's pretty obvious in terms of what that can be, but it can be as simple as physically blocking a doorway and not allowing someone to leave, all the way up to murder, homicide. Sexual abuse, so any non-consensual sexual type interaction. I consider this also the coercion that they might use. So an abuser might say like, oh, come on, and badger you until you say yes. That's also abusive. And then emotional, psychological, and verbal, I feel like are all kind of mixed up together because it kind of like one crosses in over into the other. So verbal abuse is the name calling, you're a bitch, whore, all of that kind of stuff. But also that's psychologically damaging, right? So that's also psychological abuse. Calling someone names, putting them down. Emotional abuse, not caring about someone's opinions, or, not caring how things affect them, which also, again, right, feeds into psychological. So I think of those kind of all like commingling together, but it's a lot of the gaslighting, name calling, the verbal abuse, devaluing your accomplishments, not recognizing them, telling you can't accomplish your dreams, all those kind of things, where the opposite should be true, right? We should be encouraging each other to, achieve our dreams if we're in a partnership with someone. But it's like the opposite happens, where it's, you're never going to get that, you're never going to be this. And survivors often say that they know, right, like what button to push to like really get to somebody. And I think the reason that they know what button, right, is if we remember in the beginning, things were good. We didn't know that this person was going to turn out to use all the stuff that we told them in the beginning against us, but that's exactly what they do. So like, when you're establishing intimacy with someone, you're sharing your hopes, your dreams, it's a give and take, or at least it should be. And we don't share all these things and our fears and all of that. We don't share this expecting the other person to kind of like store it away and then use it for later, but that's just what they do. So say in the beginning, I have some fears about not graduating or something like that, and I express that to them. And in the beginning, it's, oh my gosh, I'll help you if you ever need to study, all that kind of stuff. And then it turns into at some point, like, you're never going to graduate. Like you shouldn't even try. You're too stupid. And so you can see like over time, things can change a lot within these relationships. Financial abuse, I kind of already went into. Stalking. So that's, not calling someone a million times, texting them all the time, following them, showing up at their work, showing up at their house, creating new accounts on all the different socials in order to be able to talk to the person because they've been blocked. Stalking is really scary type behavior. Gavin de Becker talks a lot about stalking, obviously. Spiritual abuse. So that's when an abuser uses your religious or spiritual beliefs in order to excuse their abusive behavior. The Bible says, you know, and that's why it's okay that the Bible says that men should be in charge. And that's why it's okay that I'm this way with you, because that's a man being in charge. So anything, and it also includes things like, say you really like this one church. Okay, now you're not allowed to go to that church anymore for some reason. Say you have kids and, you know, you're a Christian or something, and that's what you want to raise them in, and they're refusing and won't let you do that and won't let you talk to them about it or have them baptized or whatever it is. So any sort of spirituality being weaponized is spiritual abuse. Cultural abuse, same sort of thing, right? Except for as a result of practices that are condoned by a culture. So that could be, that's like honor crimes. A lot of times it is the idea of dominance over a woman. In a lot of cultures, that's normal, right? That the man should be the, aggressor is all I know now. No, not the aggressor, but, you know, the one in charge, and that the female is subservient to him. And a lot of places still believe that, you know, and and the other thing too, I think, is that we're so lucky in California, and particularly the Bay Area, that people bring their culture here with them, which is awesome because we get to experience so many different things. But it also means that there can be quite close-knit communities where, you know, you'd be surprised how little they know in terms of what their rights are and, you know, what everyone else is experiencing. And a lot of times because the abuser is not letting them know. And a form of abuse would even be making someone move to America with them and then screwing with them learning English and making sure they can never really learn English. That would be abuse too. Immigration abuse, oh, that kind of led into that. So using immigration as a weapon. So basically someone's undocumented and their spouse, their person is supposed to sponsor them or get their visa, and they kind of hold it over their head and use that as a weapon anytime that the survivor is not doing something that they like. So I'm going to call ICE, you know, I'm gonna do this and that, and you're never gonna see the kids again. They're gonna take you back to so-and-so and I'll get the kids. And so all of that kind of stuff. And legal abuse, which I kind of already went into, all that filing. So another really common thing that I get asked is the red flags. How can we tell these people apart from other people? You know, what do we look out for? And I also think that red flags are kind of misunderstood, because to me, a red flag doesn't necessarily mean like immediately I need to stop talking to this person. It just kind of means like, I'm just going to like pay attention to that. I'm just going to make note of that, not out loud, but in my mind. You know, I didn't really like the way that I tried to set that boundary and he didn't respect it, because it could be that the person, you know, is not that healthy or something, you know, and they don't know about boundaries, and it can be, you know, you can go back to them and say, hey, I didn't like this, and they'll change, you know. So there are those things. So red flags doesn't always mean cut off complete communication. I mean, of course, everyone's entitled to do whatever they want, but I don't want people to feel like, oh no, there's a red flag, I need to run. That's not necessarily true. We just need to take note of it, because then when they start to accumulate, it's easier for us to kind of take it down and look at it and be like, okay, there's something going on here. Or, you know, do I want to really continue getting to know this person? So just taking mental note of them can really help in terms of recall later, at least I found. So some are intrusion or crossing boundaries. So abusers don't respect boundaries, both literal and figurative. And often they will test your boundaries, pushing to see what they can get away with, and then pulling back, you know, and then kind of taking note of where, you know, they can't go this far. So they pay attention to that kind of stuff. And they also will demand to know, you know, where their person is, that they have to, you know, where are you going? Like, who are you going to go with? Just overly preoccupied with the survivor's life in terms of needing to know everything that they're doing. So isolation. We kind of already touched on this, but that's another red flag. So someone who's not allowing you to spend time with your family or friends, or through coercion convinces you that you can't trust anyone and it's us against the world. So there's also, you know, we don't live in a bubble, and there's popular culture and stuff, and you know, media, and that all feeds into our relationships, I think. And there's this sort of romanticized idea about like us against the world, or, you know, and in reality, that doesn't sound very healthy, does it? Us against the whole world. Like, okay, what are we doing wrong that no one else is? So, but they'll sort of lean into those, you know, ride or die, you know, all that kind of stuff. Possessiveness and jealousy, another red flag. So it kind of goes into like intrusion a little bit, right? So they're asking all the time, like where someone's going. They're going to accuse someone of flirting with almost anyone, even if they just went up to the ATM and the guy in front of them said, "Have a nice day," as you walked away. And all of a sudden now you're sleeping with them. So it's like we'll accuse them of cheating with almost, or flirting with almost anyone, cheating as well. And they may check someone's car mileage to see if they're lying about where they went. Oh, well, this round trip only takes 24 miles and you got 28 miles on more on your odometer. Like, what's going on? What are you doing? What are those 28 miles? Where are those coming from? So pushing them about that kind of stuff and testing them and making them, you know, feel like we have to tell them what's going on. So, and they also might appear at your work or your school randomly, you know, without being invited. So another red flag for someone who might be abusive is unrealistic expectation. So someone who is very dependent on their partner for all of their needs. To an abuser, the survivor must be the perfect wife or husband or partner, the perfect lover, the perfect friend and parent. All of those things have to be taken care of and be, you know, the best at. And the abuser expects the survivor to take care of everything for them, both in the home and emotionally. So the survivor is doing all of the work, you know, literally a lot of the times, the cleaning, all of the work, and they're also doing all of the emotional heavy lifting and, you know, trying to keep things calm and trying to, you know, make things work. I need to change this next one, I forgot. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. or Mrs. Hyde, that's meant to say. So that's their crazy thing. You know, people often say they're bipolar or they're crazy, you know, and that's that switching back and forth. So it gets confusing when they have these sudden changes in mood, often saying that you're totally awesome. And then, you know, the next minute it's, you know, they're really angry about something. So someone who has these really fast changes in moods is also a red flag for potential problems in the future. Quick involvement. Okay, so many survivors knew their abuser for less than 6 months before they were engaged or living together, and abusers will pressure their partner to commit to them quickly. So I think this is because the more committed you are to somebody, the more likely it is that you are going to fight for that relationship. And that can mean, you know, a few different things, right? Because committed to somebody could just mean that you said love you. You know, to another person, it could be that you got married. Another person, it could be engaged. You know, it depends on the person. But once you're committed to somebody, and especially in the Bay Area, once you move in with somebody, you know, good luck finding, you know, a new place right away to move out. So, you know, once you're committed, you're more likely to fight for that relationship. You've put more into it. And so you want it to last, of course. So there are a few red flags that almost always indicate that this person is abusive. These include any use of force in an argument, whether that's holding someone down, physically restraining them, preventing them from leaving a room, or any pushing or shoving. Threats of violence. So any threat of physical force meant to control their partner, for example, do that again and I'll end you. Not normal to threaten your partner. Sometimes they'll try to pass these things off as normal, or, you know, everyone says that. Breaking or striking objects. So this behavior can be used as a punishment. So a lot of times they break cell phones, which are very, very expensive. So they'll break the cell phone all the time, or they could be doing things like breaking, you know, punching a hole in the wall while you guys are arguing, throwing things around or near the person, or just throwing things in general. Because right, that's the beginning of it. So if someone if you're arguing with your intimate partner and, you know, they get so mad that they're punching the wall, the message there, you know, is, you know, subtly, not so subtly, this could be your face. This is what happens to things around me when I get pissed off. And it could be, you know, your face. And, you know, they won't say that, but that's, sort of right if we think about the cycle and how things get more and more intense. And the reason is that fear is the goal, and not everything you don't stay afraid to like the same things as you do. Like, it's not at all making sense. Like in the beginning, the abusive behavior might be intimidating enough where it might be like, oh, standing by the door, not letting me leave. And maybe that got me to like comply with whatever they wanted. But eventually I'll learn that's all they do. They're just standing at the door. They're not putting their hands on me. If I really push them, I can get out of the way or whatever. Insert whatever example. And so eventually, right, I'm learning that, like it could be the throwing things. That's just what they do when they get angry. That's just what they do. We're working on it, whatever. But eventually over time, these things escalate because that's not scaring me anymore. Okay, what can I do now that will scare her enough to comply? If it's not throwing things anymore, maybe now it's grabbing me, and you'll see those marks on the arms, usually at fingertips. Well, I guess maybe not in the arms. I'm thinking about the neck, but yeah, any breaking or striking objects, there is an escalation there that usually happens. And again, it's because I think that they know that that fear is the goal, and so they got to up the ante after a while. Past battering. So if someone says that they've been abusive in the past, but that partner made them do it, or they've only done it with that partner, or that person brought it out in them, or they were abusing them, or, and they brought it out in them. You might also hear from friends or family or your social circle that this person is abusive. Unfortunately, an abuser will abuse any partner they are with. So if someone has been abusive to people in the past and they have not gotten help and learned to stop their abusive behavior, they are going to abuse the next person, because situational circumstances don't make someone have this personality. It's just their personality. And the rules are always changing. And so that's how we know that it's not the partner, right? It's not the survivor, because even if we were to comply with everything, the next week the rule has changed. This week it's, oh, I want this right here. And so, okay, let me make sure, okay, this is right here and everything's cool. And then a few weeks from now, I do that again. And okay, I'm just imagining this is like a thing in the house. I don't know. And you put it there and then it's like, what is this doing here? Like this is, all that kind of stuff. So the rules are never the same, which indicates that no matter what the survivor does, it's not them. It's just the abuser. So no matter if you try to follow all the rules, or you try to make them happy, it's constantly shifting and in flux, all depending on, how it benefits them. So there are a lot of barriers to leaving. Fear, not just fear for your physical safety, but the other fears that the abuser will nurture within the survivor. So if we remember at the beginning, someone is establishing intimacy with someone, and you tell them that you have like a really strong fear of abandonment or something, they will use that again, like later, and so, or it could be, oh, you're never going to graduate, you're going to be nothing without me. You need me here. And so it's different kinds of fear, not always just physical safety. So guilt, feeling bad, and the abuser will sort of, feed into that as well. Culture, reasons for staying, social norms and gender roles, people not wanting to get divorced. Love is real, it's there. Just because someone's abusive does not mean that the love just automatically disappears. That's not how love works. There's both hope that things will get better, as well as hopelessness. This is just how things are. You got a lack of options, children in the home, lack of support, all the victim blaming that happens, physical isolation, denial that anything's going on, not wanting to admit to yourself, loyalty, rescue complex, so wanting to save or change the abuser and believing that, you can do that, financial dependence, whether that's just the way it is or whether that's a result of the abuser forcing you to be financially dependent on them, or, sort of finagling you into being financially dependent. Religion and spiritual, immigration status, shame, blame, embarrassment, and stalking and harassment. So those are all barriers to leaving. You can see there's a lot. It's also dangerous to leave. I won't go into safety planning because we're running out of time, but I will go into just the most dangerous time for a survivor is when they're leaving their abusive relationship. This is when people tend to get killed. And that's because power and control is what they want. It's what they are striving for. And when you leave, you are taking that back. You are saying that's not yours anymore. You can't tell me what to do. You can't tell me where to be, you know, or how to be. And they don't like that. And so it can trigger very violent behavior in people. So that's why we just want to make sure that we're aware of that, so that when people are planning to leave, that they can, you know, plan appropriately, basically, and try to be safe. So homicide is the most severe health outcome of violence against women. Over half of female homicides for which circumstances were known were intimate partner violence related. And I already said that. So really, any time is a good time to use a safety plan. If you're dealing with an emergency, if you are continuing to date this person or live with them, you know, preparing to leave their relationship, especially, and just, you know, in general, to protect yourself after you've left. So you're going to get this, so don't worry. But I will say one note about safety planning. A lot of safety plans mention this go bag, all these papers and such. But I want to, you know, bring home that possessions and documents are not more important than someone's life. It's just not. No one wants to get up and leave in the middle of the night with no shoes on and nothing. No one wants that. Most people try to plan, right, to get their things and everything, but know that it's not that important, that it's worth someone's life. These things can be replaced. Divorce can be gotten afterwards. Restraining order can be applied for after you've left. You know, we can get your birth certificate again, like order a new one, things like that. So lastly, a lot of times people want to know, how can you support someone who's experiencing this? Don't tell them to leave. Don't pressure them to leave, especially if they're indicating that they're not ready to leave. That's not anyone's place to tell someone, you know, what to do. And if you think about it, a lot of times in these relationships, people who are being controlled have been told, you know, enough by their partner what to do. They really need to be able to take that and do it themselves. So don't try to pressure someone to leave. I understand the temptation, right, that we want to save people, and it gets really hard if it's family or friends, and it's like, I just want to like take you, like steal you away, but it doesn't work. People go back. People leave an average of 7 to 8 times before they leave for good. So that is normal to go back and forth. Don't minimize things that happen, and don't give someone advice on what they should have done or what they might do in the future. It's more than okay to sort of brainstorm with them and help them through thinking through a safety plan and stuff, but we don't want to tell them what to do, because they know their abuser best, and so therefore they know how to make the safety plan best. And don't judge them in their decisions. So I won't go through this, but I'll just say I added this. So these are DV resources by Alameda County. So there's us at the top, and then some other DV places. And ta-da. Okay, I will stop sharing so that we can have questions and such.